All right, welcome to a special episode of the Liberty Block Live. I'm Mike Sennello here as the solo host tonight as we have a one-topic agenda for the night. Tonight we're going to be interviewing New Hampshire gubernatorial hopeful Karen Testerman. If you guys are watching on YouTube, I've just posted a link in the comments section to see the stream on Facebook where you can participate in this interview's Q&A. So if you guys can bear with me, let's bring on Karen. Karen, thanks for coming on our stream tonight.
Well, thanks, Mike, for having me.
Okay, so Karen is the New Hampshire gubernatorial hopeful who's be running up against Chris Sununu, who is the incumbent governor in the GOP primary. The primary is set for September 8th of this year, and the general, of course, is the first Tuesday in November. So, Karen, before we get started, as we'll do right before we get into Q&A, how can people reach you?
KarenTesterman.com. So it's Karen, T as in Tom, ESTERMAN.
.com.
Right.
Do you want people to follow you on Twitter or Facebook or anything like that?
Absolutely. On Twitter, it's at Karen Testerman, and on Facebook, it's Testerman for Governor. Karen Testerman for Governor. You can find me.
All right, super. So we are going to get into the heart of this interview, and this is I've got some really challenging questions here for you, Karen. And so this is a libertarian podcast. We do not make any bones about that. To the moment of Corona, so for three reasons, we're going to have to ask you some really tough questions because you are running against Chris Sununu in the GOP primary. And the reason for that, there's four reasons for that. One, to the moment of Corona, he's been the most libertarian governor. I mean, you could ask for, honestly, maybe with the exception of Kristi Noem, except for her social policy out in South Dakota. Two, the opposition party has been completely and utterly dominated by the radicals within their ranks. And three, the GOP has historically been happy to bend the knee to these radicals, as we've seen in other states and in certain locations. And honestly, we wrote an article. The last thing, of course, is that we wrote an article right before this pandemic broke out and right before the shutdowns about how Chris Sununu was. We published an article, was the most libertarian candidate you could ask for, and we lauded him for his efforts. And then he made us look stupid with these government shutdowns. So we're going to ask some challenging questions. Before we do, I always want to start off my interview with allowing people to get to know the person I'm interviewing. And I ask the same question I ask just about everybody I interview, and that is, in this case, what brought you to New Hampshire?
Well, my husband was in the military. He served his 20 plus years. And one of our very first assignments was actually to New England, and we absolutely fell in love with the Northeast. When it came time for retirement, we looked around and checked out all of the various states, their tax codes, their other activities, etc., and we decided that New Hampshire was the place to come. So that's what brought us to New Hampshire.
Karen, you'll have to bear with me. I don't know if the stream has crashed on Facebook. I just want to make sure that we are up to date here with sorry, that was Facebook not cooperating with me when it came to my playback. So we're good. We're good. Wonderful.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had a momentary scare there. Yeah. So what was there as like a single factor? What was the straw that broke the camel's back? What were some other states you were looking at?
Well, it was primarily the tax structure and the fact that there was no income tax, no sales tax, that it had a great motto, amongst other things. But that was the basic, as we looked at it, and how would it financially benefit us over the other New England states, because we knew we wanted to be in the Northeast.
Really, what particularly about the Northeast was attractive to you? Because you talked about tax policy, you talked about governance. New Hampshire's kind of an outlier in that respect.
Right. Well, it is an outlier, and what we really enjoyed were the rolling hills, the green, just the atmosphere, the ability to get away from the maddening crowd, so to speak, within minutes. And the ocean was an hour away if you were inland, and your mountains were right in your backyard. There were a lot of things. We like to ski. We like to do the outdoor kinds of activities, and so New Hampshire offered a lot of that.
And where did you come from?
Central Valley, California,
Oh,
farming
excellent.
communities.
Okay. You want to describe to people what the governance was like there and what the transition was
Well,
like?
I really wasn't involved at all in any kind of political activity. It wasn't until we came to New Hampshire and I realized how you could actually have a voice with your um, representatives. I walked into a fundraising dinner, for example, of about 300 people, and there was the U.S. senators, both of them, and the congressman, and you had an opportunity to actually have a conversation with them. That would not happen in any other state in the union. It just doesn't, because you don't have that. Unless you're on the inside or you happen to know somebody that knows somebody, you don't get there. And it's very expensive if you are able to get there.
Yeah, so just as a point of clarification for people not watching in New Hampshire who may not be familiar with how New Hampshire works, the House of Representatives in New Hampshire has like hundreds of representatives in a state of
400
yeah
and 24 senators.
yeah in a state of is it even a million in New Hampshire?
It's 1.3 million, a little
Yeah.
over almost 1.36.
So that's what I think that's what Karen was. I'm assuming that's kind of what you were referring to.
Well, yeah, because all of a sudden I realized I wasn't tuned into any of the political structure at all in New Hampshire. Not, in fact, even in the United States, other than the fact that you needed to go for your presidential elections. You needed to know who your dog catcher was sometimes. But basically, I was totally apolitical until I got to New Hampshire.
Was there a single event or a single thing that led you into politics? Let's talk about your first forays into politics.
Um, I was actually not involved other than trying to observe what was going on in the public school system. There was a brand new high school coming in with a different philosophy than I was used to, and so we became involved in finding out what was going on there. And gradually, you start investigating various things and asking questions. And I actually was looking for an organization that actually was known for keeping an eye on your state laws and how they affected the family. And that's really where I started to get involved in just talking to people about what was going on and trying to find out what philosophy was going on in the school system, because I still had a child that was at home going through school.
Okay, so that actually brings us to a lot of topics that I really want to get into, including education and what's philosophy has informed your politics. But just real quick, what you're describing, could you give a year to that, a timeline, so people can?
It was the mid 1990s.
So the mid 1990s. Okay.
Yeah.
And how has your well, before we get into how it's evolved, what to that point was actually informing your politics? Now, you said you grew up in one of the bluest parts of California. So I'm
actually, the
to know.
Central Valley is very red, but
Really? Okay.
yeah, the Central Valley is very red, and there are parts of California that are conservative, but the around the cities and so forth, it tends to be more Democrat and so forth. But I really was apolitical. I grew up in a family that was Democrat, basically. They were, that's the line that they had, but I married into a Republican family. And my husband and I seem to agree on a lot of various things. But the one thing that we did agree on for sure was that we had to be involved in our children's education so that we could pick the best fit for each child that was there. And because he was in the military too, and we were traveling from place to place, we would often change the atmosphere that the child was in. Like, they may have been going to a public school. We weren't happy with some of the results that were coming out, so we would move them to a private school. They went to experimental schools up in upstate New York. We were attached to the University of New York up there. And they actually went to it was an experimental school, and where they would try things out, and the teachers would get together on a regular basis and discuss what was best for this particular child. And it was a very hands-on kind of thing. And that's the way I was raising all four of our children.
So how old are the kids now? Have they exited the public schooling system?
They all have their own families. Yeah, we've got.
Okay, so they're out of school right now, and I do want to have
a lot of grandkids at this point.
Yeah, I do want to have that conversation about public school, because I've actually done videos on what works in public schooling and what doesn't, and I do want to get into that, because I think that is probably a pretty relevant conversation to have when it comes to something like this, the office of the governor of the state. So I do want to focus still on what to this point has basically informed your politics to this point. Your website quotes the Declaration of Independence a lot, and it specifically mentions the role of the separation of powers and how that's important to you. So a lot of the people that are going to be watching us are libertarians. So
how did I get there?
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that happened too was, of course, in growing up in the Central Valley of California, you got the very first part of the discovery of America. You got into the revolutionary period, and then you'd move on to the expansion to the West, and then all of a sudden we were at the closing in, and you had to get through the gold rush because that was very important to California. And then, oh my goodness, time's running out. We got to hurry up and do the World War and go on. So when we first experienced New England, we were able to go and actually see where the first shot heard around the world was
Crispus Attucks. Yeah.
We actually got to go visit some of the actual places. And as we did, it became more and more interesting. And I started picking up books and reading the American history with a lot more fervor and a lot more interest. And I wanted my children to also get that same passion and desire. And I started to go to different lectures and so forth with people like David Barton and historians, people who had access to the original writings of our founding fathers. And that really inspired me to really understand what was going on. When we got to New Hampshire, of course, I found out that they wrote a constitution far earlier than our Constitution was written. And so that was another avenue to start to explore. And then you start finding out things like the Pine Tree Rebellion that happens. And, it just makes history come alive to you, to the point where if those people cared that much about this country and made that much of a difference, then what can we do to keep it going?
Okay, so on that topic, then, what do you view as the proper and appropriate role of government in society? Remember, you're talking to people that range from full-on anarchists to pretty much in line with GOP.
Well, I think that the current government that we have, the federal government, is way, way, way beyond what it needs to be. It's beyond what the Constitution said it's supposed to be. It's now in a situation where it's ruling the people rather than controlling the people controlling what they're doing. So I think that we've got to somehow rein it in. One of the best places to do that, though, is at the local level.
And making appeals for the 10th Amendment from the office of the governor. And, yeah.
Well, yeah, that would be at the federal level. But even at the local level, people have to be involved. Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. So if you're not vigilant and you don't know what's going on in your own town, then you really don't have anything to complain about, because that's where it really starts.
Yeah, so I would describe my ideal system of governance as basically what we had as a system of governance, not the full-on list of laws, some of which were downright immoral at many levels, but like of the Jeffersonian era. So if you could imagine, say, 1800 or so United States, as far as how government was formulated, that's how I was envisioning as kind of an ideal, and it's just kind of gotten out of hand.
Well, it would be nice if we could have a discussion about many of the things that are going on rather than just being dictated to, and that's my biggest concern at the current setup.
Okay, so in that case, what's your take on how government should be? what's your take on the free market and how government should be involved with any of that? I mean, your website mentions this quite a bit, the importance of a free market.
Well, yes, and so people are very creative. They're in the beginning, when we used the collective society, it didn't work, right? The founding fathers tried that the first winter or two, and they found that it just was not working. And so when they allowed each individual family to work and reap the benefits of their own harvest, and then share as they saw fit to share, then things started to bloom and blossom, and that's what made America great in the long run. What's happened, however, is that now we've got government that tells you how you're going to spend your charitable dollar. They tell you how you're supposed to behave, instead of our saying, wait a minute, we are asking the government to do the administrative duties, and that's it. You're not supposed, when you look at the role of the governor, for example, he's supposed to be the enforcer of the laws that are there, the laws that come from the people's representatives. And the other thing is if there's ever a situation where militia must be involved, then he's supposed to be the commander in chief, and that's it. Making sure that the funds that that the state has, that they're going to be expending in various areas, that they go to the proper place. And in New Hampshire, we're exceptional because we have an executive council, and that executive council is supposed to be reviewing the various contracts and making sure there's no hidden traps or anything like that for the government to fall into, so that they are the final say for the people on how that money's to be spent. And so the governor's role is really pretty minimal, and actually government's role is very minimal. If you look at what we call it the general court here in New Hampshire, because they were really supposed to be hearing if there's any grievances that the populace had against the government, then they would be hearing it, deciding whether there was any validity to that grievance, and then they would be acting appropriately. Today, however, our legislature proposes probably about 1,000 bills a year, and many of them are stepping on your liberties and mine.
So, then in that case, it sounds like you're describing what they described in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence. So, just real quick, we're going to come back to the New Hampshire to the militia in a minute, and in the role of the governor when it comes to the militia. So, would you sound like you're an avowed capitalist? Would you stand behind capitalism now that we have a wing of one party that is avowedly anti-capitalist?
Well, the whole thing is that it really gets down to what does the individual small businesses, what are they creating themselves? And actually the role of government is to make sure that there's fair trade going on between the parties, that there aren't egregious overstepping of one person over another. And in fact, in New Hampshire, we have too many licenses and too much of government involvement in what goes on with the small business. And a lot of times, if we get rid of those regulations and some of the licensure that goes on, people would operate much more efficiently and probably prosper a whole lot more.
So what would be the role of the governor in that already existing legislation then? If there's bad legislation out there, what is the role of Governor Karen Testerman in getting rid of that bad legislation?
Well, calling attention to the bad legislation that exists. I've often said that it would be really, really great if our state legislature would go back to biennial sessions, but you keep running into an argument against it. So one of my solutions would be that the very first year you encourage the legislature to do nothing more than look at the budget. Pass the budget, figure out what it is, because it's a 2-year budget. And while you're sitting in your little committees and so forth, look at the existing law books, figure out what's there that needs to be repealed. Look at what needs is redundant. Look at what needs to be sunsetted. Look at what refers to areas that have been removed from the legislature, and so it's a law that references something that doesn't exist. Look at those things and let's clean that up first, and then the next time around, if the next session should be introducing those things that you found in error, rather than coming up with something new and a new way to regulate the people.
So are you suggesting that in the current system you would simply veto bills that came across your desk until we got a budget passed?
Oh, well, I wouldn't just say I'm going to blanket veto everything. I'd have to look at various things, but those would be the founding principles that I would be looking at. Is this a violation of what was the intended purpose of the Constitution, which was to actually tell the government what it is that you can do versus what is it that you want us to do?
Yeah, so we are actually going to come back to that's going to segue into our next two topics perfectly. And then after we get through our Second Amendment section here, we are going to get into the reopen protests and why it is that you decided to run for governor here. So Sununu, to his credit, has been very good about the Second Amendment. And this is coming from folks who have published articles that would support an argument for allowing, in some ways, the mere ownership of nuclear arms in private hands. We are, at the Liberty Block, for the most part, Second Amendment absolutists. And we've actually published articles about the number of, for example, red flag bills that have come across Sununu's desk that he's just simply vetoed. So, are these ERPO, bills, these red flag bills, are these something that you would agree to veto in the manner that he has?
Oh, absolutely. I am a life member of the Gun Owners of New Hampshire. We own several firearms ourselves. We go out and practice on the range when we can, and so absolutely, I would. And even there have been some situations where he's teetered a little bit, but he seems to have been really good about vetoing what he needs to be vetoing. We'll see whether he carries through, because there's a red flag law up in front of him right now.
Yeah, and we wrote an article about it actually just a few weeks ago. If you guys can check that out on libertyblock.com. So on to that end, you're going to eventually have to go on a debate stage if you defeat Sununu and discuss with the opposition the role of the Second Amendment. So what they're going to say what type of firearms should be allowed, what type of firearms should not be allowed, and what the role of
it's none of their business. I'm sorry. The whole thing is that they're making the inanimate object the problem, and it's not the problem. It's the people who have those inanimate objects, and every element in society, there's always bad players, and so you have to take those case by case and deal with them case by case. I mean, it's just like the police department. New Hampshire has one of the best law enforcement training situations in the whole of the United States, and occasionally you have bad players out there. Well, then the community that has that situation going on needs to deal with it, but it's not something that we should be saying, oh, well, we have to defund everybody, or we have to take everybody's firearm away from them because somebody else over here didn't know how to properly use it, or had mental problems, or whatever it was. But you have to deal with those on a case-by-case situation.
So as far as mere ownership is concerned, I'm not saying what you would do with it. I'm not talking about how you would store it. I'm not talking about manufacturing. But as far as mere ownership, would you be in favor of allowing regular citizens to have automatic firearms, such as an M16?
Absolutely. Law-abiding citizens should be able to do and own what they need to. I mean, the whole purpose of the Second Amendment anyway was to keep us safe from a tyrannical government, a government that was overreaching its bounds and was changing what our founding fathers originally wanted. They didn't want a king telling them what to do. They wanted to be in charge of their own lives, it's a leave us alone society.
Yeah. So it sounds like you are a Second Amendment absolutist. So that when it comes to mere ownership, I mean, could you envision yourself ever seeing a line being drawn in the sand
For
mere ownership of an arm?
Yeah, I think we're at that point in some cases. I mean, if the left has its way and gets into control, we're going to have armed conflict. I just
Yeah,
that's
and
where it's headed.
yeah, and your take on the Second Amendment is great, and that sounds like we're kind of in line with that. So, Sununu has said certain things about the economics that he hasn't held to, especially when it comes to COVID. And we're going to get to that in just 1 second. But this last question on this topic, what surety can we have as the public and as libertarians here that are Second Amendment absolutists that we can hold your feet to the fire on that sort of topic?
Absolutely, I would expect you to. And that's the role of each individual citizen, is to be vigilant and to hold their elected representatives accountable. And when they're not, then they need to call them out on it, and they need to publicize it, and they need to do whatever they can to call that person into line.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, let's transition just a little bit, because we talked about what's informed your politic. We've talked about generic topics. We've talked about the Second Amendment. Now let's talk about why it is you're running for governor, which your website makes very clear. The reason that you decided to run for governor, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to put words into your mouth, has everything to do with how Sununu has treated COVID-19, which I said in the very beginning of the show made us at the Liberty Block look stupid for lauding him before that effort. So your thoughts on how Sununu has treated the COVID-19 outbreak?
Well, my solution would not have been even to go the direction that he did, but I will give him credit. There was a panic about a virus. I must say, too, that I have a degree in microbiology and chemistry. So looking at it from my perspective is why I would disagree with him. But I can give him credit that there was the public health was coming in and saying that there was a problem with this particular microbe that was out there, that it could be really bad, and that we needed to take certain measures. But after the first couple of weeks, there's no reason why he should have continued it. And had he at that point said, I understand that things are not, it doesn't appear that this microbe is doing what it was purported to do, and I'm just going to open everything up, everything would have been fine. I wouldn't have done anything. But to continue to go on and on and on and issue he's got over 53 or 54 different emergency orders that he's been putting forth, and each one will open up a little bit, but then it says to some citizen in New Hampshire, you're either essential or you're not essential, or you don't have the smarts, and this is what really bothers me, you don't have the smarts to be able to use your own good judgment. And here are the facts. Here's what we know about this virus. We know about how it's affecting people. We know what age groups it's affecting. And so this is the area that you need to be knowledgeable in. We want you to be really smart about your hygiene, because we know that washing your hands makes a difference. I question the masks and the social distancing and so forth. I've not gone along with at all from the very beginning, because I don't see it doesn't make any sense to me. It's just the whole thing has been a control factor, and the fact that he's telling people who is and who is not essential it's actually demeaning, it's insulting, and it's wrong.
So on that note, I want to. The question I'm going to get to next is, what would Karen Testerman as governor look like in that scenario? But okay. Before I do that, I have a tweet that you've retweeted, and I hate doing this, but it's going to inform the next question. And it's coming from a place of good faith, I swear. But the tweet you've retweeted is, here it is, hashtag New Hampshire politics, cases up, deaths down, ages 0 to 49, death rate 0.0002%. Sorry, folks, if I get the number of zeros wrong. I don't think it's really all that important. 50 to 64 death rate 0.001%, 65 plus death rate 0.006%. So as far as the data is concerned with all of this COVID stuff, what is informing you? What sources do you rely on?
Well, I look at a lot of different sources. I've looked at doctors that are epidemiologists, that are virologists. I've looked at the statistics coming out of the CDC. I've looked at the actual statistics coming out of New Hampshire. I think it's very interesting that they only tell you how many people are infected today. They don't really, they do start telling you about the deaths, but what they don't tell you about the deaths is, was there any comorbidity? Was there any other factors that introduced the situation? What are the age groups of the people that are dying? And just recently, they've started telling you that most of those deaths, 83 to 87% of the deaths, are occurring in long-term care facilities. And when you really look at how many children are infected, what the results are coming out of there, what you're really finding out is that this particular virus did not behave like they had anticipated it would. And if you look at the behavior of coronaviruses anyway, after a period of time, they start to mutate. When they mutate, they tend to weaken as they get more and more down the line. They can morph into something else, and we could get another virus that appears, and they could say, well, it's another coronavirus. It could be a mutation of this one, and put the scare back into everybody that we have to go into lockdown again.
Yeah, but I mean,
it doesn't make any sense at all.
The initial research seems to indicate that its mutation rate is exceptionally low. So that's actually great news for a vaccine. That's actually great news for people who catch COVID, get over it like almost everyone does, and build some sort of natural immunity. So, and you know, to that effect, I mean, cases are up, but just about absolutely everything is down.
Well, and then we're testing more too, so you would expect the cases to go up to a certain extent. Well, and the other thing that I rely on is that, you know, when I went to college, I'm sitting here thinking we live in this microbial sea of good and bad bacteria and viruses. There are going to be some that impact you and some that don't. And no two people are going to react exactly the same because we're all individuals. So to say blanket across the board, we all have to get vaccines is not fair either. You have to know what's in those vaccines. You have to know whether or not your particular situation is sensitive to certain ingredients in those vaccines. And you need to be given the opportunity to make a choice. It can't be mandated by government.
Well, I mean, I'd love to come back to that, but I don't know if we're going to have time. And you know, one of the key factors that nobody's allowing us to even talk about is that when you have mobs and mobs and mobs of tens of thousands, in some cases near hundreds of thousands of people piled up on top of each other, well, we're not allowed to attribute any COVID spike to that. But when it comes to things like Trump's rallies of much smaller numbers, or even, as I'm sure you were aware, the protests, the Reopen New Hampshire protests that happened in Concord a few months ago, that was met with vicious attacks from the left about how, you know, that they were going to spread COVID as a result. So how would you respond to a news outlet covering those sort of things like that?
Don't you think it's interesting that we have been mandated by the governor that we have to wear masks, that we have to social distance, that we need to stay home, that only certain businesses can open, and then when these protesters wanted to come into the state of New Hampshire, he said, "Oh, come on back, come on in, just don't break anything." I mean, and they didn't have to social distance. They didn't have to wear masks. He just opened up the door and let them in. That is completely not helping the people of New Hampshire. And quite honestly, it's not fair to us to tell us that we have to do certain things and then tell somebody else, oh. And another thing, he didn't want to keep our borders open because all these people from other states who actually own property in New Hampshire and have their summer homes up here and pay taxes, well, we have to keep those people out. And it's not making a whole lot of sense to a whole lot of people. And that's the big problem there. So under a Karen Testerman administration, we wouldn't have closed anything. We would have said here, this is what the threat is. We understand that it could possibly be this, but if you take good care of yourself and you eat properly and you exercise right, and if you happen to be in a situation where your immune system is compromised, these are the things that you need to do. You need to stay in home and maybe have somebody else take care of you until you get past this and make sure that you're okay. But and then I would have left it up to the people to make that good, compassionate, caring decision that most New Hampshire people have.
So the left is going to accuse you then of valuing money and economics over lives. What would you respond to an accusation of that kind? Because that's going to come up.
Well, if we had done that, we would have gone into the long-term care facilities and figured out why they were the ones that were being the most likely to die. And if you look at the CARES Act anyway, it incentivized us to not only label deaths, no matter what the cause of death was, as a COVID death, but also to put people on ventilators because you got more money for it. That's a bigger problem to throw back at the left. Why are you giving us more money to put somebody on a ventilator?
So,
and
all right.
80% of the people who go on ventilators die.
Well, folks, you heard it from Karen herself. In the Karen Testerman government, an outbreak like this, you would not see any shutdowns. So we'll have to hold our feet to the fire if that ever happens. But so that kind of actually, because you brought up the protesters, you brought up the people coming in from New Hampshire, from outside to New Hampshire to conduct these recent protests. And I think we should dive right on into that. So let's just start off with the broad question. Is America a good thing?
Yes. America was built on a I can, the last four letters in the word American is I can. And it was people come to this country so that they can live their dream, that they don't have the restrictions that other countries give to them. So that a lot of people come here, they have no money, they have $100 tied to their pants, and they struggle. And I've seen lots of situations where there'll be multiple families living in one house as they build their economics up to the point where they can now all go out and get their own houses. I mean, this is what America's all about.
So it's July 5th, July 4th, good thing?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Why do you think it is that we celebrate Independence Day?
Independence Day was really the culmination of 3% actually of the population at the time who said that we are capable in a God-fearing world to govern ourselves, to be responsible to people, and to be able to get along with other people. And, we are able to make our own choices. Sometimes we fail. We pick our bootstraps back up. We learn from our failures and we go on. And it's the only place in the world where we can exercise that kind of freedom to be able to make our own choices and live like we want to live.
And would you agree that we just haven't always lived up to those ideals?
Oh, yeah. Sometimes we don't. I mean, and today's government overrun is a prime example of why we haven't lived up to some of that. We're sort of, our founding fathers would probably be in a royal panic if they saw some of the stuff that's going on in our governments today.
Well, they're the ones having their statues torn down because they apparently own slaves. So, thoughts on that? Because I'm about to ask you if the birth of the nation was 1776 or 1619.
I'm sorry?
Because I'm about to ask you if the birth of the nation was 1776 or 1619.
Well, the birth of the nation was when Columbus came in, and some of the other early explorers that were coming to this country, this open land that they were coming into, and the ideals and the thoughts and the dreams that they had, they worked hard for. And so, yeah, I think that it was a process to get to that point, because many of our founding fathers were, at the time, were good members of the English crown, and they really didn't want to necessarily start another nation. They were going to it was going to be an expansion of the royal crown until they started taxing them without letting them have a voice. And that's when they finally decided, you know what, if we're gonna be taking our money and putting it into something to run us, then we ought to have a say in it.
So to the opposition that says that, you know, the story of the United States is one of oppression and tyranny, I mean, and having it start in 1619, your response?
Well, actually, it was, the reality is that the people of America that came here have had their dreams. They've managed to self-govern and to move on, and to just focus on all the bad things that we've done or that have happened over the multitudes of years is just as wrong as to focus just on the good. Then we have to look at the fact that yes, there were mistakes made, but we learned from our mistakes and we moved forward, and we did some very, very creative things. I mean, we invented the iron, we invented the spaceship, and the airplane, and the car, and all of these other things that were not. Our creative juices were allowed to expand and to grow, and it was because we were being allowed to the freedom and the liberty to govern our own lives.
So with that freedom, of course, comes some degree of responsibility, and we're going to come back to these founding fathers that are having their statues torn down, and what Karen Testerman's governorship would look like in those situations. And we are going to come back to the difference between a rioter and a protester. So if you don't mind, but what do you think the role of police should be in your state? And I bring that up especially because your website has described the New Hampshire Police Academy as premier in the nation. Do you want to speak to that specific, or what generally speaking should be the role of police in society?
Well, the police are there to enforce the laws that are there because, there's situations where we do have bad players or people who get out of control. What we need to go back to and not to sidestep your question, but just because this is something that is missing in today's society. It used to be, when I was growing up anyway, if you had a dispute with your neighbor or something was going on, you took the time to go over and talk to your neighbor, have a friendly discussion, hopefully, and resolve whatever your problem was. And you didn't call the police to come into that situation unless it grew into a situation where you needed a third person or some mitigating arbitrary voice to come into a situation. So that the whole purpose is the whole responsibility that we have as individuals is that we need to try and settle our disagreements with people in a civil manner, and we have to start looking at the guy over there and considering, well, what happened over there that made him do whatever it was that bothered me. And sometimes, you're bothered about something, and the person that you think has been doing all this wrong to you has no idea that they bothered you in any way. So we have to get back to the point where we are willing to talk to our neighbors. So we're willing to get along with our neighbors and not just take care of them and watch over them and see if there's anything they need, but to actually get into a real relationship with them so that we can resolve our differences.
So how do you think that actually works then? When you have two opposing sides who fundamentally disagree on even the most basic tenets of what makes for a civil and just society?
Well, that's when you have someone who, like a police officer, who comes in and says, "Hey, this is what we're seeing. If there's any violation of an existing law, then we issue citations or whatever." And if it escalates to the point that it does, then it goes before a judge, who is still another party to discuss all of this. But again, I go back to the fact that it's ideal if we can figure out how to get along with everybody, with our next door neighbors, right, and resolve any disagreements there. Obviously, there are people who persist, and you have to take it up one step further And that's where your outside forces, like the law enforcement, starts to step in, like the courts start to step in. But ideally, we would be taking care of it amongst ourselves. And you know what? The governor's role in that particular case is to really advocate, use the bully pulpit to encourage that kind of behavior.
Okay, so not anything actually legislative by any means from that
Right.
position. Yeah, so that to that effect, I mean, do you? This is probably a one-word answer, but I mean, you do believe that there is a role for police and that police should merely exist, at least, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see no reason why they wouldn't be in
So
existence.
would you be in support then of the defund the police movements?
Oh, absolutely not.
Well, then let's segue right into that because this is what you're getting from one side of the aisle, who are rioting. I hate to say it. I know I'm not allowed to use the R word, but Karen, hopefully you can discern the difference between a protest and a riot.
Well, protests are peaceful. Riots are well, they're disruptive. They're not just disruptive because you can protest and be disruptive, but protesting is done in a peaceful manner. They're not going out and breaking things and destroying things. You're having your voice. You're assembling to have your voice heard, and hopefully your elected representatives or whoever it is you're trying to get across to will notice that there's something going on, and then hopefully what materializes out of that is a civil discussion about how do we resolve this particular problem or this situation.
And speaking of those particular problems, do you ascribe to the notion that there is a serious problem within policing of cops just willy-nilly shooting and killing people, let's say based on race, since we're kind of running out of time here?
Yeah, well, sorry about that. But if you look at the number of actual police where there has been a death due to police, I think the last statistic was something there were 19 white people who died at the hands of a police officer and 9 black people who did. We're not talking. Yeah, we're not talking about the 7,400 people, black people who die at the hands of black people. So, I don't think we have the massive problem that the media has created.
So I mean, you just segue into our next topic here. You're going to have a conversation at some point about Black Lives Matter, I'm sure, once you get onto the podium. I personally think that Black Lives Matter, the literalism is being used to subvert a clearly political ideology. So your take on Black Lives Matter, the literalism and the political ideology?
Well, all life matters. All preborn life matters. All senior citizens' life matters. Your life matters. There's not a question about that. And I grew up in a community where I was the only Japanese child in the whole school system.
Asian lives matter, yeah.
Right. And so when you really want to look at it, then you have to consider every ethnic background. You have to consider the English, the French, the Irish that supposedly fall into the white community. And I don't know that there is any real white community because they're all mixed up when they get to the United States. That's one of the things that we are known for is the mixture of the ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah. So the bait and switch of the literalism that a certain type of life matters. Yeah, Jefferson espoused that in the Declaration of Independence, in my opinion.
Well, and in my opinion too, the whole thing is to make victims out of these people and tell them now, because you are this particular background or whatever you want to call it, we're not going to judge you on what you can do and what your character is. We're going to judge you and make sure that you get all of these handouts because you're a victim. So that's not American.
So what do you do in the face of these bad faith actors that insist upon, say, an apology from somebody who said something that was not to their liking, or these bad faith actors who let's say will ask you, do Black Lives Matter? I mean, my response candidly would be yes, all lives matter. Now, if we're going to talk about the political movement where their founders have been caught saying, and I quote, we are trained activists, we are trained Marxists. I would suggest that the phrase Black Lives Matter is not something I'm going to associate with because I don't want to get confused with the movement, which I don't stand for.
The movement is clearly anti-American, and some books that would get that big T word coming out, about treason. And so at some point, the bully on the playground has to be stopped. And that's what the rioters really do, is they try to bully their way into everything. And only when we stand against it, strong against it, and draw the line in the sand and say no more, will they back down.
So what would you do in that circumstance? I mean, we've seen how Seattle has allowed Chads to exist, and then they got sued, so they had to actually bring in the police and get rid of it. But what would Karen Testerman do in that situation where a certain group decides that they're going to come in and run roughshod over Manchester, let's say?
Well, they wouldn't be allowed over the border. I would have brought out the militia and said, you need to stand at the border.
So just for clarity, the militia in New Hampshire is the New Hampshire National Guard?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. And how would you be able to identify who were the nefarious actors?
Well, you'd have to put them on the border, and if they're coming across in a mob, and they're coming to push their way in, and they're coming with their signs and their whatever, you just have to put your foot down and say, no, we'll close our borders, period, to anybody at this point until it subsides.
So we talked about these bad faith actors, and they're going to dig up something, because, I mean, you've been on this earth for more than a year. They're going to dig up something that they're not going to like about you. Some comment on Twitter or something that was taken wildly out of context. And we here on the Liberty Block have said, as our mantra, never kowtow to belligerents. Carl Benjamin, who was famous for saying, it was, what was his quote? It was, I'm not apologizing for anything. You dirty smear merchants, get bent. So is that a hard line that you're willing to take when it comes to bad faith actors?
I mean, this is the way I deal with my own children when they were growing up, is that ultimately the voice of authority is here, and you're not going to keep pushing against it. You have to know that there's a boundary that you cannot cross.
All right. Well, this is the last question, because we're way over time here, but hopefully you're willing to hang out for a few extra minutes.
Oh, sure.
To do some Q&A. But the last question is, and this came from the editorial board over the Liberty Block. They wanted me to ask this question, and I love it as a closing question before we get into Q&A. Do you believe that liberty and a free society can be sustained over time in a society and culture that does not respect or believe in liberty and personal responsibility? And if yes, how? I have it written down.
Yeah, no, you have to have personal responsibility. If we're not self-governing, we cannot exist in the opportunity that we have that's called America.
All right. Well, we are going to go right into Q&A, so you're going to have to bear with me, folks, because the new UI on live questions on Facebook is kind of terrible. So before we get into that, Karen, if you want to just inform people who are new to have just joined us, how they can reach you and how they can follow you.
They can follow me at Facebook at the Testerman for Governor. They can follow me at Twitter at Karen Testerman, and or go to my website, which is www.karentesterman.com. And I also do radio, so you can follow me on WSMN 1590 from 12 to 1 on Mondays and Fridays.
Awesome. So let's dive right into question and answers. And this is a great question. This comes from Elliot. Would you consider alternative forms of revenue to taxation, advertising, lottery? And I'll just add a little bit to this. Larry Sharp over in New York was famous for, hey, what if we get businesses to sponsor the naming of bridges? So would you consider alternative forms of revenue to taxation?
Well, yes, there are alternative ways that you can raise revenue, but one of the better ways to get things under control is to control your spending.
How about that? Somebody who's willing to look at the other side of the ledger. All right. So this is kind of a practical question. This is Dave asks, will the party, and I'm assuming this is the Republican Party, be strong and united enough by autumn so that New Hampshire conservatives can take our state back? I'm editing that as I read just for grammar. So I guess it's a practical question.
The reality is that it doesn't matter whether there's an R behind your name or not. The reality is what kind of character do you have? What type of qualifications do you have to run to do the job that you're asking the people to elect you to? And until we start getting people of integrity and honesty back into offices, that are actually making their decisions based on some very strong moral principles, then we're not going to go anywhere anyway.
Okay, so Elliot asks, and this is a great question, and I'll have to frame this a little bit. Should police ever enforce victimless crimes? So that's one question, and I'm going to add another question to this. What should police do in the face of a terrible law?
You have a responsibility, whether you're in the military, whether you're a person who's employed in a law enforcement type situation, to when there are moral boundaries being broken and ethical boundaries being broken, you have a responsibility to say, no, this is not right.
So where would you draw that line then?
Well, it depends upon the situation. Yeah, morally. But, if you're being asked to do something that is against the Constitution of the United States or against the state constitution, even though it is a law that has been passed by the legislature, then and you're asked to enforce it against someone, you have to turn around and say, I have taken an oath to the Constitution and to the state constitution, and I cannot do it.
So my take in that circumstance is the way that they would not enforce it would be to turn over their badge. And if you just have an entire city with no badges, then you're going to have a real problem on your hands. You're going to have to address that law. And otherwise, they should, in the most draconian fashion possible, enforce terrible laws. Because then you get the Gandhi situation where all of a sudden people see what that looks like and they're like, oh my God, this is terrible. So that's right. My take. So I wonder if you'd be in line with...
So for example, you've got a sheriff who actually takes his oath to the U.S. Constitution as well as to the state, and he's got a situation where the governor or somebody is coming in and saying, you've got to confiscate all these guns from this person or these people, this group of people, and he says no. They have a right. There is not supposed to be a law that infringes upon your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. And unless you've done something that breaks the law, then I'm not going to enforce just an arbitrary edict that says that I have to do so.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the end, the governor of New Hampshire is, in the end, in some way, the head of the state police, because you can pretty much terminate the chief of the state police, right?
Yep.
Okay, so
you can, but again, it's up to the police officer how good is his word to his oath of office. And sometimes you have to say, okay, that's where I'm going, but you have to be willing to do that. To take the arrows because of a stance, and the public opinion would at some point be, once you find out all of the circumstances around it, would be saying something about it too. I mean, look down at Virginia, where the governor down there wants to confiscate everybody's firearms. Mm-hmm. And you've got to have law enforcement and the sheriffs there who are going to say, no, we're not going to do it.
Right. And the way I would do it in my ideal world is to just have those sheriffs turn in their badges. And then you create that conundrum where there's just no law enforcement.
Well, why do they have to turn in their badges? Why don't they just hold the governor accountable to his oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States? It says that you will not infringe on that.
Yeah, I mean, if that was a rhetorical question, I apologize for answering it. But I guess the reason that my reasoning would be that the role of law enforcement is to just enforce the law, and if you start having a discretionary effect here, then you wind up getting into a position. Obviously, time is a limited resource, so they can't obviously enforce every law all the time, just because there's, everybody's jaywalking, everybody speeds. I guess the rationale I would have behind all of that is that you don't want the police officers to be arbiters. You want the courts to be arbiters at most. and the police officers.
Ideally, yes, but there is a point. I mean, especially when we're talking about the Second Amendment, there has to be a point at which they say, no, we're going to we are not going to back down. We're not going to just turn in our badge. Because turning in your badge at that point is acquiescing. And so you need to be able to stand up and say, no, this is not right.
All right. Well, Leah asks, and I apologize, Leah, if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, if it's Lee or Leah. And I don't know actually much about this because this is getting into some pretty esoteric knowledge of New Hampshire politics. But what do you think of the New Hampshire GOP committee endorsing Sununu?
Well, they're violating their bylaws. And I appreciate that question because their bylaws say that they will absolutely stay neutral in all primaries. This is a primary. And they have not remained neutral in many of the primaries that have been coming forward. And all they want to say is just elect the person with an R behind their name.
Okay, so this is a lot of people have asked this, and it's been a very liked comment, and I guess we've pinned it to the top of the comments sections. For the folks who are helping me out with this stream at the Liberty Block, I got to thank you so much for covering the comment section because I'm doing the engineering for the stream too. So I got to shout out to those people who are covering that for me because it's already a lot to handle. But this is the most asked question I think on here. Kate asks, if you become governor, will you release the names on Lori's list? I believe that's the list of police officers who have shot and killed somebody in the line of duty. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
On the Lowry's list, I'm not sure that I would have to investigate that further, and it depends upon what the situation is. But there is a level of privacy that we seem to be violating in some cases. Certainly, there are situations where those names need to be released, and it really depends upon what the situation is. And I'm not familiar enough with it. I'd have to go and investigate that myself.
Okay, so I'm just pulling this up on Google. I honestly don't know what Lori's list is either. It looks like it looks like we actually have read this right. Chat, please do correct me if I'm wrong. And Leah actually does say yes, correct. You got it right. I did pronounce her name correctly. Awesome. Let's see if we have anything else to go through here as far as questions are concerned. So I apologize if I haven't gotten to all of your comments. Unfortunately, like I said, the new UI for Facebook doesn't allow me to see every comment at once. It only allows me to see as many as I have asked. So, Karen, thanks for coming on. That seems like that's the end of the questions as far as I can tell. Yeah, that seems like that's the end of the question. Karen, thanks for tuning in.
Well, Michael, thank you very much for having me on, and I really appreciated the questions that you had. They were very thoughtful and informative. So if anybody wants any more information, please go to KarenTesterman.com and don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'd love to have a discussion with anybody that's interested.
All right. Well, that concludes everything. Everybody at home, thanks for watching us. You can follow us at facebook.com/The Liberty Block, or you can go to thelibertyblock.com to stay in touch with all latest for all of you watching in YouTube land. Thanks for signing into the Captain Phoenix channel. As always, we will be having the EJS show later on this week. We'll keep you in touch with that. And next week, we'll be returning to our normal broadcast of the Liberty Block Live. And we'll see you then. For the Liberty Block Live, this is Mike Sennello, signing off.